Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Have you ever thought about how much our families influence who we become? Like how our personal dreams kind of bump up against the expectations and maybe even like the secrets that families hold?
It's so true. And throw in how art reflects all of that family ambition, even secrets,
Yeah.
and then how American culture itself shifts over time. It's a recipe for some really powerful stories.
Totally. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. The world of contemporary fiction, specifically family dramas
Mm.
that explore artistic ambition against the backdrop of, late 20th and early 21st century America.
Mm.
If this sounds like your kind of deep dive, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on future
Yeah,
episodes. Our guide for this exploration is Brian Castleberry's novel, The Californians. And by the way, we'll have a link to that on Amazon down in the description. Now, this book is more than just a simple story. It's like this intricate web of interconnected lives playing out over generations in California. It really makes you think about identity, about legacy, about how much the past hangs on, even as we try to move forward. We've got some really fascinating excerpts to work with today, little snippets into the lives and relationships of a few key characters. And we're also going to be looking at some blog posts that'll get us a kind of a unique perspective on a fictional TV show that's actually mentioned in the novel.
That's going to be really interesting to unpack that layering of the story, the novel itself, and then how people within that world are looking back and reflecting on this TV show.
Right. It adds this whole other dimension. So our mission today is to sort of untangle some of these threads.
Hmm.
See how these different characters and their experiences connect. We'll look at family dynamics, artistic ambitions, and even how broader cultural and societal changes kind of seep into their lives. Sound good?
Sounds great. I'm ready to dive in.
Me too. All right, let's start with the foundation of it all, family.
Oh.
And let me tell you, the Californians does not shy away from messy family dynamics. Right from the get-go, we encounter families that are anything but traditional.
Yeah, that's for sure. Take Tobey Harlan, for example. There's this one scene where he's talking to his father, Track, on the phone during an evacuation. It starts off casual enough, but there's this underlying tension. You can just feel it. Track's more concerned about his wife, Judith, making tacos than he is about Toby's worries for Sophie's cat, Gray. And then you find out that Toby's the youngest from Track's third marriage with half-siblings from a previous one. Immediately you get the sense of this kind of scattered family history and maybe some competition for parental attention.
Right. Like even in a moment of crisis, that distance between them is palpable. It kind of makes you wonder about the long-term impact of those early family dynamics. Does that distance ever really go away?
And it makes you wonder about those other siblings, too. Like, where do they fit in all of this? What are their relationships with Track like? I'm really curious about that.
Absolutely. We also meet Diane Stiegl and her family, and those relationships are a whole other story.
Yeah, she's a fascinating character.
There's one exchange with Track where she immediately jumps to defend her deceased grandfather, Klaus von Stiegl. It's almost like there are these unspoken loyalties within the family and maybe even some resentment toward Track. And then you add in her complicated relationship with her own parents, Percy and Antonia, and it's clear that there's a lot of history there.
You get the feeling that Diane's connection to her grandfather, Klaus, is a really big part of her identity, even though he's no longer alive. And when we learn more about his family history, things get even more interesting. It's like there are these contrasting dynamics that play out over different phases of his life. His relationship with his parents in the Lower East Side, his marriage to Olive, and then their son Percy, and then later on, the interactions with Percy and Antonia. Each period seems to come with its own pressures and complexities, and a lot of that seems tied to finances. It's like money is this underlying force that's always there shaping these family interactions.
It's always lurking in the background, isn't it? Money has a way of doing that. It's so interesting to see how those financial tensions kind of ripple through generations.
And you can see how those tensions maybe played a role in Diane's life, too, shaping her worldview and maybe even her art. Speaking of art, I think it's really fascinating how these family dynamics are reflected in the artistic pursuits and legacies of these characters.
Totally. It's like art becomes this other language for them to express those complicated feelings and connections. Diane Stiegl, for example, is obviously immersed in the art world. We see her painting and her clear admiration for her silent filmmaker grandfather, Klaus. And then you've got her making waves in the New York art scene of the 1980s, her gallery debut, her friendship with Lily Wong, and even the critical reception of her work, like the Gipper Triptych, #2. All of that paints this vivid picture of her artistic journey.
And Klaus von Stiegl's legacy as an artist is really fascinating, too. He starts as a silent film director and then transitions to working in television, specifically with this fictional show Bracket starring Frank Harlan.
Yeah.
It's like he's constantly evolving as an artist and not afraid to push boundaries.
And what's striking is his perspective on the audience, right? He says audience matters after the fact, but only in a small way. It really makes you think about the motivations behind creating art. Is it for yourself? Is it for the world to see and judge? Or is it something else entirely?
Exactly. It's like he's saying the creative act itself is what matters most, and the audience's reaction is secondary. And it makes you wonder how that philosophy might have shaped his work. Did it make him more experimental, more daring, or did it create a disconnect between him and the people he was trying to reach?
It's a great question. We see these themes of legacy and artistic ambition play out in other ways, too, like with Lily Wong, who's a contemporary artist and a friend of Diane's.
Yeah, Lily's really interesting. She's very much into conceptual art, and she has this really strong perspective on the purpose of art. In one of the excerpts, she's interviewed for Art News, and she talks about how art should challenge existing narratives and make people more aware of the world around them. It's like she sees art as this tool for social commentary and for pushing people to think differently.
It's a powerful way to look at it, and it makes you realize that art can be so much more than just something pretty to look at. It can be a way to start conversations, to challenge norms, to make a statement.
And it makes you wonder about how Diane and Lily's art might be influencing each other. They're both working in very different styles, but they're also both very aware of the power of art to shape perceptions and maybe even to inspire change.
Absolutely. And then we have to talk about Klaus von Stiegl's legacy itself, how it's perceived and how it evolves over time.
Right. It's not static.
Yeah.
There are mentions of these influential film critics, Peter Bogdanovich and Pauline Kael, writing about his work, and then there's this whole festival dedicated to his films. It suggests that he's gained a new level of recognition and appreciation, perhaps even after his death. It makes you wonder how artists are remembered and what contributes to their lasting impact.
It's fascinating to see how reputations can shift over time.
Yeah.
Sometimes an artist's work might be misunderstood or even rejected during their lifetime, but then later generations come along and find new meaning in it. I think that speaks to the enduring power of art. But it's not just these individual stories and artistic legacies that we're dealing with. The Californians also does a great job of placing these characters within a very specific cultural and societal context.
You said it. The excerpts are littered with these little hints about the political and social changes happening in America during that time. There are references to Reagan's presidency, the Iran-Contra affair, and this overall rise of conservative politics. And all of that is playing out in the background, shaping the world that these characters are navigating.
It's like the 1980s are almost another character in the story. We're seeing this period of intense ideological shifts, economic anxieties, and a real questioning of traditional values. And those tensions are clearly reflected in the lives and choices of the characters. For example, Diane's Gipper Triptych, #2. I mean, even the title hints at this commentary on the political landscape.
Oh, for sure. And the fact that it's a triptych, which is traditionally used for religious subjects,
Yeah.
adds another layer to that. It makes you wonder if she's critiquing the way political figures were often seen as almost godlike during that era,
Yeah.
and how that kind of blind faith can be dangerous.
It's a really interesting interpretation. And then you have these contrasting lifestyles and values that are presented throughout the novel. You have the Two Bears commune, which represents this countercultural movement and this rejection of mainstream society. And then you have the bustling art scene in downtown New York with its own set of ambitions and anxieties. And of course, there's the glitz and glamour of Hollywood with its own unique pressures and temptations.
Yeah, it's like the book is showing us this kaleidoscope of American life in the late 20th century, capturing both the idealism and the disillusionment of that era. And it makes you wonder, like, what would it have been like to be a young artist trying to find your voice and your place in the world amidst all of that change? It must have been both exciting and terrifying.
Totally. And then there's this fascinating layer added with the blog post, Tobey's Couch Potatoes. It provides this really interesting retrospective look at the fictional TV show Bracket. It's like we're getting a glimpse into how people within the world of the novel are reflecting on a piece of their own pop culture history years later.
It's so meta, right? It makes you think about how we all interpret and remember the stories we consume. And Bracket itself is full of these controversial elements, which makes its popularity even more intriguing. It speaks volumes about the changing landscape of television and how audiences' tastes and expectations evolve over time.
It definitely raises some questions about what we find entertaining and how those preferences are shaped by the culture we live in. And to bring things right up to the present, there's this controversy surrounding the Track Harlan chair at UC Davis. It's like this stark reminder that the past is never really past.
It's a perfect example of how past actions and associations can have real consequences in the present, especially when it comes to issues of identity and academic freedom. It's like history is constantly being reevaluated and debated, and those debates can be incredibly contentious.
It highlights the importance of engaging with the past honestly and critically, even when it's uncomfortable.
Agreed. And I think it also connects back to these themes of family legacy and how those legacies can be both a source of pride and a burden. It's a really complex issue.
So we've talked about family dynamics, artistic ambition, and the broader cultural context. But we can't forget about the characters' personal relationships and struggles. We see all sorts of romantic entanglements in the Californians, some fulfilling, some fleeting, some heartbreaking. We've got Toby and Sophie, Diane's connections within the New York art scene, and even the tragic story of Klaus and Keystone.
And it's interesting how those relationships often get tangled up with the characters' ambitions and the pressures they're facing. It's like they're trying to find love and fulfillment while also chasing their dreams, and sometimes those two things collide.
And let's not forget about the personal struggles that are hinted at throughout the novel. We learn about Diane's past struggles with addiction and Antonia's journey with mental health, and the financial difficulties that some characters face add another layer of realism to their lives. It reminds us that even amidst all the glamour and ambition, there's this very human side to these characters.
Yeah, it makes them so much more relatable, right? And it also highlights how these personal struggles are often intertwined with the larger societal issues we've been talking about. The economic pressures, the shifting social norms, the constant pursuit of success, all of that takes a toll.
And then there's California itself. You can't talk about the Californians without acknowledging the significance of the setting. It's more than just a backdrop. It's almost like a character in its own right.
Absolutely. California is this dynamic, ever-changing landscape that shapes the lives and experiences of these characters in really profound ways. And the specific locations that are mentioned, Tinsley, Palm Springs, Los Angeles, two bears, each represents a different facet of California life.
You've got the sunny optimism of Southern California, the laid-back vibes of the coast, the rugged beauty of the North. It's a state of contrasts and contradictions, and that's reflected in the stories of the characters.
And it makes you wonder how much of who they are is tied to this place, you know? Would their lives have unfolded differently if they'd been somewhere else? I don't think so. California's in their blood.
It's definitely woven into the fabric of their identities. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Californians, I think it's clear that we've uncovered some really rich and complex themes. We've explored the intricate nature of family legacies, the power and impact of art in all its forms, and how those personal and creative journeys are shaped by the ever-shifting landscape of American culture, particularly within California.
And it's not just about the characters in the novel, right? It's about all of us. It makes you think about your own family history, the cultural moments that have shaped your life, and how those things might be more interconnected than you realize.
That's such an important takeaway. We're all products of our pasts, both personal and collective. And by exploring these stories, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
It's like holding up a mirror to society and seeing all the beauty and the ugliness reflected back at us.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the world of the Californians. It's been a pleasure dissecting these themes and sharing our insights with you.
It has. What a great discussion.
Now, we want to hear from you. What resonated with you the most? What surprised you? Share your favorite moment or a thought-provoking insight you gained from this deep dive in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this exploration, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into fascinating stories and ideas. Until next time, happy reading.
And happy reflecting.
See